We now return to a very, very long court case. Hi, barricading Governor of Barclay Prison. Everyone calls me Gossip. I sell jaunty little your other persona, if you don't mind. Oh, do beg your pardon. Of course. My name is Daily Vigil. I used to be the chief warder at Barclay Prison. The reason you've been summoned here to court today is to testify about the jailbreak of the so-called Professor 10 years ago. Oh, Professor. We've already been through all that before, a decade ago, and the conclusion was that there wasn't anything untoward happened. Indeed, a convict escaped from your prison, Governor. Hardly what you'd call nothing untoward. Ah, Will. The convict's death certificate was somehow falsified after he was allegedly executed, and he escaped the prison inside his own coffin. A plan of that complexity could never have been carried out without the help of somebody of influence inside the prison. Governor Caden, you don't imagine that the passage of time will afford you any protection. Whatever. I can read. I'm a good reader. If it turns out that you were involved in the plot to break Mr. Asogi out of your prison, then of course the consequences will be very serious. In all likelihood, a capital punishment. Gads, hold on there, laddie. All I was... Witness, Governor Caden. Aye, sir. You have a critical role to play in the public safety of our country, a great responsibility to shoulder. The significance of your testimony in court cannot be understated. Therefore, think carefully before you speak. Prosecutor Asogi, if you threaten the witness again, you will be held in contempt of court. My apologies, my lord. There's no disputing the fact that an intricate jailbreak plot was enacted 10 years ago. Clearly, you were both involved in some way, so you will testify before the court now and explain exactly what took place. Very well. Let the witnesses give their formal testimony. Tell the court everything you know of the plot to break Asogi out of Barclay 10 years ago. Not sure that interjection was necessary from him, but whatever. It was the day that Japanese jock was found guilty. The directive came from the prosecutor's office. I assigned the convict to the chief warder Vigil here, and put the plan into action behind the scenes. Responsible for Asogi right up until the night of his execution, but I knew nothing of any plot. I didn't ken if there were some negotiations between the convict and the prosecutor's office. All I did was carry out my duty. For Her Majesty's Great British Empire. British Empire. A directive from the prosecutor's office. Are you saying that was the jailbreak plot? Hey, that's right. Who sent it? Who authorized that plan? I didn't ken that. You're saying you don't know. Listen, there wasn't anything about the professor case that wasn't unusual in some way. I didn't ask any questions. I did just what I was told to do. More than that, I couldn't tell you. I see. What if the jailbreak plan originated from the prosecutor's office? Then one thing is very clear. As suspected, there were clandestine dealings going on between Mr. Asogi and that office. The jailbreak was promised in exchange for Mr. Asogi admitting to crimes he didn't commit. That, counsel, is nothing more than speculation on your part. So, let me ask the defense. Oh, yes, my lord. I fail to see how these witnesses have any more pertinent information here. Do you intend to assert your right to a cross-examination? Absolutely. I have no intention of squandering a single opportunity, my lord. It seems all you Japanese are fiercely tenacious. Very well. Proceed, counsel. It was the day the Japanese junk was found. The directive came from the prosecutor's office. And you say you don't know who actually issued the directive. Hey, that's right. All I can be sure of is that it was official. But if it was from the prosecutor's office, that narrows down who could have issued it straight away. And it wasn't me. I can't even say with certainty that it did originate from the prosecutor's office. What? There's no telling where it started. There's a fair chance it came from higher up the ladder. Basically, I can't give you any indication of who was behind it. Can't be serious. All we can say for sure is that the order must have come from somebody in authority, I suppose. The likes of us on the ground, as it were, dinna bother with idle speculation. We just get the job done. Right. I send the convict to the chief warder, Virgil. Plan. So, Mr. Vigil, you didn't know anything about it at all? That's right. My only role in the scheme was as a scapegoat. That's right, isn't it, Governor? Some poor beggar had to take the rap for it. Alright then, who else did know about the plan? I've not the first idea, laddie, and my part in the whole business was basically just dealing with the aftermath. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were other folk in the prison service who had been given similar orders. So you don't know who else was involved? Hey, that's right. All I can tell you is that the night it actually happened, the person at the reins was Dr. Stevens. And who was that again? Dr. Courtney Stevens, or Dr. Scythe as she's known now. Why did I have to get caught up in such a terrible business? I was responsible for the soggy right up to the night of the execution. Hold it! Did you not notice anything unusual happening in the lead up to that night? No, everything was unusual, exception after exception. After all, it was a professor. The man had terrorized the country as never before with his crimes. In order to hide his identity, he was forced to wear an iron mask over his head. I'm giving you an accent you don't have, sir. Hideous treatment. The fellow was surprisingly docile for someone who'd taken the lives of 5 of the country's nobles. Being the chief warder, he was the only person permitted to approach his cell. I can still hardly believe that I was duped by my own country. I believe you jumped from the window of the governor's office when the jailbreak was blamed on you, didn't you? Oh, Vigil. I cannot apologize enough. No, Governor, I don't believe you can. It won't change what's happened. And what else can you tell us about the situation, Governor Caden? Well, here we go. Again, if there's something to convict, and they'll go get the But you've already acknowledged that orders came from the prosecutor's office to arrange for the man's escape. There must have been some sort of negotiation. That's the only explanation. Aye, well, be that as it may, I dinna ken nothing about it. The witness stand is no place for telling what I don't know for sure. I ken that much, I do. And I presume you also know this. Not telling what you do know is a criminal offense. So you were just following orders, is that it? I'm afraid that won't absolve you of guilt here. A man was still killed illegally, even if he was a condemned criminal. You may very well be found complicit in murder, Governor. So that's what it's to be, is it? Even with the threat of conviction, you won't break your silence. All I did was carry out my duty. Hold it! Did you carry out the plan in its entirety? I did everything I could at the time. As you know, Genshin Isugi was shot dead in Lowgate Cemetery after the escape. Tell me, was that part of the plan too? My instructions were to do with getting the joke out of the jail and nothing more. I can't tell you anything about what happened after that. Only, personally, I believe his death was the last part of the plan. Oh?
Excuse me!
Mr. Vigil, is something wrong? Yes, sir. What can I do for you, sir? He's saluting now? Is it some sort of Barclay convention? What Governor Caden was just saying seemed to upset you. Did it bring something to mind, perhaps? For the last 10 years, I've completely blotted out the memories of that time from my mind. I was betrayed by my superiors in the name of my country. Just as my father was betrayed, it seems. But you see, thinking back now, I really can't imagine the shooting of Mr. Sergei in the cemetery was ever part of the plan. What makes you think that? Well, it just doesn't make sense, does it? To make the man admit to crimes he didn't commit with the promise of a jailbreak only to kill him in the end. That's treachery of the worst kind. But the point is, if the intention was always to betray him, why would there be any need for all the chicaneries of an escape? Yes, that's quite true. If whoever negotiated with Sogi never intended to keep his or her end of the bargain, it would have been far simpler just to let the man be executed in prison as dictated by his sentence. It all happened in that vast chamber of secrets that is Barclay behind high prison walls. I suppose nobody knows what really went on in the execution room now. Yes, it's an unsettling mystery, certainly. The truth be told, there is a wee matter that's never quite made sense to me. If you believe there was some kind of negotiation behind the jailbreak between the Sogi and the body at the top, it doesn't quite add up, does it? What do you mean, Governor Caden? I must insist that you explain these doubts that you have by amending your formal testimony. Yes, I'll go on then. I'm giving you all sorts of accents now, sir. It's not the one you got. It seems to me that the Japanese fella didn't have nothing to bargain with.
Hold it!
Admitting to the crimes, that was what he had to bargain with, surely. I kinda see that myself. After all, did the prosecution not have conclusive evidence against the Carly, eh? Or what? This, you mean, discovered during the final victim's autopsy. There's every possibility this conclusive evidence was fabricated by Scotland Yard and the prosecutor's office.
Objection!
Possibilities are all very well, but nothing has been proven. You can holler about the misconduct in the trial 10 years ago all you like. But if you can't establish that it happened with hard evidence, no one's going to listen. Aye, that's alright. So what I'm saying is, the convict had nothing he could use for any kind of bargaining at all. The witness makes an astute point. Logically, it would seem no negotiation could have taken place. And yet the plan to break the man out of prison was definitely put into practice. So he must have been armed with something that gave him an angle to negotiate. So Asogi-san agreed to confess to the crimes because he was assured he'd be broken out of prison later. I really don't think Kazuma-sama's father would have engaged in such negotiations. And perhaps something compelled him to agree. What a terrible thing, using the law to legitimize such underhand dealings with a desperate man, only to double-cross him in the end. It's quite the opposite of justice. Can't help feeling there's something about this apparent negotiation that doesn't quite add up. Something doesn't quite add up, Mr. Naruhodo? No, it doesn't. But I can't quite put my finger on what yet. Well, in that case, we must keep digging until we identify the problem. Indeed. Okay, let's take a look here. So did we determine that the Red-Headed League was nothing except a fraud? Yeah, that's all it was. Last will and testament. Only weapon I had left. All material possessions and wealth belonging to me delivered to my son, Cosma. Right. His bargaining chip was to give Virgil the possessions to give to his son, implying that he knew he was going to die. But how does that become the bargaining chip? Because he would bargain to get himself out of jail. The man would lose his job. For what? To get his son to come over? It's the only other thing with his name attached to it, so I guess we have to go with that. But we... okay... Do I have to press on that again to get to the next bit, or do we just present this? Because this didn't keep the amended testimony. Gotta push on this one.
Objection!
It was a test. Okay. It just didn't. It didn't add it. It just replaced it.
Objection!
Confessing under oath to murders he didn't commit on a verbal assurance of later being broken out of prison. Genshin Isogi was taking an incredibly risky gamble. Very true. There was nothing to stop the British breaking their word and executing him behind closed doors anyway. Under normal circumstances, no man would stake his life on a gentleman's agreement like that. Which means that Mr. Isogi must have had a trump card. Something that guaranteed he wouldn't be betrayed. Some kind of weapon. Evers, the fella couldn't have possibly had anything like that. But you know that he did, Governor. The Isogi papers. The name given to the last will and testament of Genshin Isogi. Right, that got stolen. Okay, yes. Turns out that Mr. Isogi was hiding his will in his cell at Barclay. Chief Warder Vigil caught him with it one day. You squealed, didn't you? Yeah, wee rat. Did I not tell you to keep that a secret? You can't touch me now. Mr. Vigil caught sight of that will through the bars of the convict cell. Mr. Isogi pleaded with the warder. All right, then. But what's on that paper? Last will and testament. This will is the only weapon I have left now. A weapon. After the convict had been killed following the elaborate pretense of the jailbreak. That document mysteriously disappeared, didn't it? Well, yes, but all the prison warders searched through the belongings in his cell, but that will was just nowhere to be found. As I understand it, an exhaustive search was made for the document, which became known as the Isogi Papers. Governor Caden, I believe you ordered your prison staff to find it at all costs, didn't you? Okay, I'm still confused, though, because the whole premise of the jailbreak and the whatevers was predicated on him having an ace up his sleeve, but how would they... Like, this would have had to have been unknown to anyone then, that Vigil broke him out, if that's the case. Because if this came from the highest authority to break him out, like what... How does the will and testament... It doesn't make any sense. Like, the motive for the whole premise of the jailbreak doesn't exist, and yet there's this one ace he had up his sleeve that still doesn't... I don't know, this whole thing is so damn convoluted. I believe you ordered your prison staff to find it at all costs, didn't you? I'd be right in saying that you knew. You knew that the so-called Asogi papers had the potential to make great waves somehow. Jeez, what the blazes are you blethering about? The will was found right and proper. In the fellow's cell, where I said it would be. But how can that be? We're in his cell. We all searched the place from top to bottom. Well, you didn't do a proper job, eh, you peely-wellied galoot? You can't criticize me now. I showed it to you, forwarded it on your lawyer. Yes, you did. I have the document here. It's written in Japanese and reads, The Last Will and Testament of Genshin Asogi. Which means everything is as it should be. Not quite, my lord. You see, there's an undeniable inconsistency here. What? What inconsistency? Mr. Asogi described this document as the only weapon he had left, and yet, this will contains nothing of significance at all. Nothing that would have given the convict any leverage. Are you suggesting, my learned friend, the last will and testament stored at Barclay Prison all these years is actually a fake? As has clearly been demonstrated already, what went on at Barclay Prison was far from above board. So it would have had to have been Jigoku then who wrote it, because how else would they know Japanese that is in native tongue? That last vilification by the defense was an affront to the entire British legal system. This absurd notion of a weapon is something for which we have only the former chief's warder's word. Under oath, I would say, the man could quite easily be lying, or at the very least sorely mistaken. What? No. Oh, I definitely heard him say that, I swear. Clearly we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to know exactly what happened with these so-called Asogi papers. A waste of time. If the will was fake, where's the real document? Mr. Vigil was stabbed in the back by the judiciary 10 years ago. He lost everything, very nearly his own life. And now you're going to do it again. You are ready to brand him a liar and turn your back on him without even letting him defend himself. It's clear that Barclay Prison is hiding something. It's clear that the jailbreak was masterminded by someone in the prosecutor's office. It's clear that some illicit negotiations took place. Is your lordship just going to gloss over these obvious facts? What did you say? You should hear more from the chief warder. Have him testify again. The trial must go on. The man's voice must be heard. It seems that a vocal few here are utterly blind to the truth. Very well then. Let the witness testify again. Tell the court precisely what you think you saw at the convict's last will and testament. Yes, sir, my lord. As the warder responsible for condemned convicts, I attended to Mr. Asogi and kept watch over his cell. The night after he was found guilty in court, he was doing something with that will in his cell. He turned the cell inside out, looking for it after the execution, but to no avail. I can't remember his... It really would just be easier if I get his old gossip voice. Then I could keep his voice consistent. I only found out about the Asogi papers when the directive came telling me to impound them. The document was in the folds of the fellow's robe that was left in his cell. A kimono, I think it's called. Really, you think it's called that? In his kimono? That's a lie. We searched every inch of the man's cell. We looked through all the clothes. It can't be true. Are you not satisfied with calling me a liar at once, eh, you wee waffinger? Oh, there's nothing you can do about it now. You don't have any hold over me anymore. Other than the hold you like to take on my cravat, of course. Is that what you're going to do, is it? Are you going to give me a good shake again? Or are you too scared? Little and large, what a double act. We complied with Asogi's will as far as was possible. All of his personal effects were delivered to his family home in Japan, as a courtesy to the homeland of the most notorious killer our country has ever seen. And we were much obliged. I can confirm that all of my father's belongings arrived safely, except for the ring, right? Aye, and you cannot deny the handwriting is of that of your old man, eh? Yes, there's no mistaking that it's my father's brushwork. Really. And this last will and testament was the man's last weapon, was it? I think we can safely assume that the convict was merely prattling, knowing that his end was nigh. So, counsel for the defense, your cross-examination, please. Yes, my lord. As the warder responsible, I attended to him in his cell. So would that mean that you conversed with Mr. Asogi? Yes, certainly. Though there was precious little time before his execution was due. He was remarkably calm, considering his days were very much numbered. In all honesty, he really didn't strike one as a man capable of mass murder. Yet he confessed in full to the crimes. I know, that's why I felt compelled to ask him one day. I can still recall his reply. I'm guilty of the unforgivable crime of ending another human's life, yes. But he was so tranquil and intelligent, it put me in mind of an Eastern holy man. And what about the will you saw him with? What can you tell us about that? It was the beginning of all the drama. I remember it very well, yes. Right after it's found guilty, he was doing something with the will. And he pleaded with you not to report him, didn't he? Yes, that's right. I like the Bampoggiara you didn't tell me. A blatant breach of trust that was. I could see that the man had a noble spirit. I found myself wanting to treat him accordingly. But according to what you told us 2 days ago, the convict had been strictly forbidden from having any writing materials whatsoever. Yes, you're quite right. So that when exactly was the will penned? That was before the man was remanded to Berkeley, obviously. Yes, at the prosecutor's office under supervision of the relevant authorities. I personally instructed Asogi to make a will for the benefit of his family in his homeland. In that case, why was it found in his cell? What do you mean by that? Well, if it was penned at the prosecutor's office, you would have expected that it would remain there for safekeeping, surely. It's curious. There doesn't seem to be any obvious explanation for why it was subsequently found in the convict's cell. Oh, well, the defense makes an astute point. Well, Governor? There isn't Governor gonna be expected to ken the inner workings of the prosecutor's office. In that case, Lord Strongheart, perhaps you can shed some light on the matter. I'm unable to offer an explanation here and now. I would have to consult the notary responsible for the will at the time. The fact that my father's will was discovered in his cell is clearly inconsistent with what was expected. I want to know why. Another inexplicable mystery, then. Well, the thing about the will... I turned the cell inside out looking for it.
Hold it!
It was the governor who ordered the search for the will, as I understand it. Is that right? Yes, and when I reported back that we couldn't find it, he grabbed me by the cravat and yelled, "It kinda have disappeared completely," in my face. Well, it's down to the governor to keep everybody working as hard as they should. I think the governor needs a wee taste of his own medicine, Mr. Naruhodo. Point is, it was clearly considered a very important document, wasn't it? But it proved impossible to find. That's right. And before I knew it, it was in the morning paper. That blood-curdling article. The executed mass murderer who'd risen from the dead. Oh, you mean the article based on Mr. Drebber's experience in Lowgate Cemetery? Yes, that was it. The day after I'd read the news, I was summoned to the governor's office. And that's when the awful accusation was made. That you'd aided Genshin Isogi to escape from the prison, resulting in your immediate dismissal. I'm afraid I really don't remember anything after that. As the governor of the prison, I had no choice. I couldn't have done anything else. I only found out about it when the directive came. And that directive came from the same source as the one instructing you about the jailbreak. Hey, from the top levels of the prosecutor's office. What name was on it? I didn't ken for, and I didn't ken now. No. I ken now. All I can tell you is that my orders were to do everything in my power to find that document. The directive said it had to be somewhere inside the fella's cell. Document. Was that the wording? Document, not will. Aye, that's what it said. Am I clutching at straws here? I just wonder if it was really Genshin Isogi's last will and testament that the sender of that directive was after. Continue with your testimony then, witness. The document was in the folds of the fella's bedrooms, okay.
Hold it!
In Mr. Isogi's kimono. Hey, the one he'd brought with him when he was locked up. Yes, he was permitted to have his personal effects with him during his incarceration, I understand. That's right. He was granted as much freedom as possible during the few days before his execution. Indeed, he had a number of items of personal significance, I remember. He was very reluctant to part with them. Some books, that kimono, his sword. His sword? Karuma, the famous sword of the Isogi clan. It bears the soul of my family. Don't doubt it, but I wasn't really getting at that. Forget it being the soul of the clan. Could the man have had a more obvious weapon? Have some respect, Ryunosuke. Respectful silence? Warders carried firearms at all times, and the inmates have shackles around their ankles. He couldn't have hurt anybody with that thing. You think so? Still, he was allowed a sword, but no writing materials. Aye. He wrote that will before he came to stay with us at Berkeley, you see. Dr. Mikotoba was asked to bring the necessary Japanese writing implements to the prosecutor's office. Scissori inkstone, black sumi ink, and some hanshi rice paper, no doubt. I was present when he wrote it, but I'm sorry to say, the letters just look like a squirming mass of jet black earthworms to me.
Excuse me!
Go on. Are you feeling faint, Mr. Vigil? Mr. Vigil? Sir, he was scarlet, sir. What? I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to blurt it out like that. Less swaying and more explaining would be helpful. Is it something about the testimony we just heard? Have you recalled something of importance? Something of importance? Possibly not. I'm unable to tell which way he's leaning, I'm afraid. My lord, the defense asks that Mr. Vigil be permitted to supplement his testimony. with this possibly or possibly not important detail. Permission granted. Go ahead, Mr. Vigil. Yes, it was Scarlet. As I remember it, the document was written in scarlet ink, but perhaps I'm mistaken.
Hold it!
Scarlet, you say?
Well, yes, I mean, I only caught a sight of it for a brief moment, of course. But even by the dim light of the cell, I remember thinking that it was an unusual color. At the very least, I'm quite sure it wasn't black.
Witness. Is that really what you saw?
Why, sir.
Is something wrong, Lord Strongheart? I apologize. Continue. What do you make of that, Mr. Naruhodo? For Lord Strongheart to be so visibly shaken in that way. Oh, then I have her. You can plainly see the writing here, and it's as black as the arrows of Hell's waistcoat.
Well, yes, you're right.
Mr. Vigil, I'd like to confirm one point with you. Did you actually see the content of the document that Mr. Asogi was holding that night?
Oh, well, no. I mean, there was no time. As soon as he noticed me there, he hid it behind his back.
But it was definitely a will, was it?
Yes, it was. That's what Mr. Asogi told me.
Court need waste no further time on this matter. We have the will in question in our possession. There is nothing more to add. A will written in scarlet ink. What did Mr. Vigil really see Kazuma's father holding, I wonder? Let's go back to the record. Well, there's some red ink. This is black ink. This has no ink that we can see. This also has no red ink that we can see. See, how can we tell? Like, how am I supposed to be able to tell what's going on here? And there you go. Recent scarlet ink stains visible on the little and ring fingers of the right hand. No document in corresponding ink was found. Okay. Of course, these are not. Okay, well that must be the thing, huh? If you have an inkling, Mr. Naruhodo, you must present it to the court at once. That testimony doesn't give much away. So this will really was penned by Kazuma-sama's father. I wonder what he could possibly have meant when he described it as a weapon. It's starting to sound very much like Mr. Asogi actually had nothing. But the plan to break him out of jail went ahead, which means he must have had some bargaining power. He must have been hiding something. It's the only explanation that makes sense. So, are we supposing then that the blood from Gregson, having established that he was killed before he was moved, was actually ink? That's why it was wet and sticky. It's starting to sound like Mr. Asogi actually might have had something. No, that wouldn't make sense. That's complete... No. I'm getting my time frame mixed up because Mr. Asogi died 10 years before this whole incident, so the red would have had no significance. We still don't know how that's possible then, because that's something that hasn't been cleared up. How did he have so much blood left in him to be all over the floor? Okay. Which is it, Mr. Naruhodo? I'm not sure, but I feel as though I'm on the brink of understanding all this. Let's listen to all the information again and see what more we can learn. We can't overlook even the smallest detail. Absolutely. See, now there's a sixth one. So we gotta do the ink Scarlet-colored writing is what you said you thought you saw, Mr. Vigil. And I believe that's exactly what you did see. Evidence again. You have no evidence to say that. Have a look at this report. That's my brother's autopsy report. Yes, and there's something in here that's bothered me since I first read it. It states that scarlet-colored ink stains were noted on the fingers of the victim's right hand. Yes, so it does.
Scarlet ink.
Now, I'm not familiar with the habits of the British aristocracy, I freely admit, but I would hazard a guess that they don't all go around with ink stains on their fingertips, do they? Oh, it is not appreciated. My brother was a well-bred and fastidious man. Should ink have sullied his fingertips, he would have cleaned them immediately. What is your point, counsel? My point is this. Whatever Lord Clint Van Zeeks was writing in that unusually colored ink must have been directly before his death, because he died before he had the opportunity to clean his hand. What? I remember something troubled me at the time. At the scene, the lid of my brother's inkwell was open. But Clint was punctilious was punctilious about such things. It seemed unusual. And well, especially since it would have evaporated by the time you had to close that stuff. And no document penned in the color of the ink that was in the inkwell was ever found. So the document disappeared. Are you suggesting that the document my father had in his hand that night in his cell was... It's the manuscript, The Hound of the Baskervilles, right? This is when Sholmes is gonna pop in here, because nobody has this damn thing, so it has to be Sholmes, and that's why he's forbidden anyone to see it in the strongbox. The same document that Lord Clint Van Zeeks was writing moments before his death. Then it was... If Mr. Vigil's testimony is to be believed, it can only mean that yes. It can only mean that, yes. Mr. Vigil. Sir? When you spotted Mr. Asogi with the document in his cell, his precise words were as follows, were they not?
All right then, but what's on the paper?
The last will and testament. This will is the only weapon I have left now. Last will and testament. If the conversation really did go as Mr. Vigil says, then what we now know completely changes the meaning of what Mr. Asogi said. You really think? Mr. Vigil did indeed see the convict with a will, but it wasn't that of Genshin Asogi. It was the last will and testament of Lord Clint Van Zeeks. Nani?
Objection!
This is madness. My brother's last will and testament. That would mean that he had chosen to die. That is what it would mean, yes. No, impossible. That is utterly out of the question. Van Zeeks? Clint was pursuing the professor. It consumed him day and night. Whatever happens, would never have abandoned his investigation before its conclusion. Never. He wouldn't rest until the job was done. Until the killer was caught. The idea that he would willingly accept his own death is obscene. And yet, we can be sure that he was writing his will moments before his death. And that Genshin Asogi came to be in possession of that document. So what could the will possibly have contained? Clearly, something that couldn't be made public under any circumstances whatsoever, because armed with that document, my father was able to negotiate with the judiciary for his life. Something so damning that it prompted the powers that be to enact that daring jailbreak plot. Yes, there can be no question that the will contained information of the utmost secrecy. Information of the utmost secrecy. No, it couldn't be. I've heard more than enough. Pursuing this notion of a phantom will nobody can attest to have seeing serves absolutely no purpose.
Objection!
No, my lord, that's unacceptable. What did you say, counsel? The last will and testament that Genshin Asogi had in his possession was that of Lord Clint Van Zeeks. All the testimony and evidence presented to the court has logically led us to that possibility. We have a duty to pursue the line of reasoning to its conclusion. But with no possible means of knowing the contents of the document, there is no line of reasoning to pursue. A reason why Lord Clint Van Zeeks, a man of high noble standing, would have chosen death. Information so secret, people in the judiciary would be willing to negotiate the jailbreak of a condemned killer. The only explanation that fits those facts is an unthinkable truth that turns absolutely everything on its head. But it's just too hideous. Mr. Naruhodo? However difficult the situation might become, you work with your client in pursuit of the truth. That's what you resolved to do when you entered the courtroom this morning, if I'm not mistaken, Susato. So hold up your head high and keep soldiering on. Yes, you're right. 10 years ago, in his final moments, Lord Clint Van Zeeks left behind a will. A will that Genshin Asogi was able to use as a weapon to negotiate his escape from prison. In all probability, the details in the will were related to the Professor case. The defense's last statement is mere conjecture. What are you getting at, man? Ryunosuke? As soon as these words come out of my mouth, there's no going back. I believe that the last will and testament of Lord Clint Van Zeeks was in fact Who was the person with the sword thrust in their chest? Death from a single stab wound to the heart. Clint Van Zeeks. Indicative of a duel. Committed suicide. You can do it, Mr. Naruhodo. I believe that what Lord Clint Van Zeeks actually penned that day was a confession. A confession? Regarding the masked murderer known as the Professor, and his true identity.
Objection!
Enough, counsel. What are you saying? Do you even realize? A confession about the true identity of the Professor. That would mean... Lord Van Zeeks, I appreciate this must be hard to take in, but it's the only explanation that fits. The killer that terrorized London a decade ago and became known as the Professor, the man believed to have murdered 5 members of the aristocracy, wasn't Genshin Asogi at all. No, you can't be suggesting. Was in fact the man believed to have been the 5th victim. Lord Clint Van Zeeks himself. It's finally open, is it? Pandora's box. The great Van Zeeks family, they've been thoroughbreds of the British judiciary for years. Lord Clint Van Zeeks, he was a paragon of justice in the capital. But he was actually a mass murderer, a perpetrator of atrocities. If the general public were ever found out, law and order in this country would be finished. My brother... Oh, this is too awful. Poor Lord Van Zeeks. Wonder, though, did he never suspect Mr. Naruhodo? Lord Barrett Van Zeeks is a brilliant prosecutor. Is it conceivable that he didn't realize what his older brother really was? Order. Order! Lord Van Zeeks. The professor made use of an enormous hound as his murder weapon. I told you! Tell me, did your brother own a dog? Yes, he did. Balmung. He was a well-known hunting dog. People called him a giant. I don't believe this. But my brother would go hunting in the forest of the grounds behind the house. He always took Balmung. After Clint's death, Krisha passed away too, almost as if he were following his master. He was a magnificent hunting dog, worthy of the jewel-studded collar around his neck. A jewel-studded collar, like the one in the ring. That's right. Though sadly, some years ago now, it was stolen by a thief who broke into the house one night. Jewel-studded collar stolen by a thief. It so happens that myself and my colleagues have come across such a collar during our time in London. Could you? There was an old emblem attached to the collar too, made of pure gold. It was topped with a small crown and bore an ornate capital letter B. What? An emblem bearing the initial B. Why, you know it? It's the insignia. The Baskerville family. What? The Baskerville? Why is that name coming up now? Baskerville is the family name of my late brother's widow. That pure gold emblem was an heirloom which Clint acquired upon their marriage. There can be no doubt, then, the collar you've described was Balmung's. Family insignia of Lord Clint Van Zeek's widow. There was a considerable amount of blood on the collar when we saw it. Since we know the dog was used for hunting, it could have been from its quarry, of course. But it could equally have been from human prey. Oh, is it true, then? Lord Van Zeeks really was the professor? Impossible. These Japanese are making it all up to exonerate their own. So, in fact, the person responsible for these murders of nobles and royals was a noble himself. And that threatened to be an enormous scandal that would irrevocably destabilize British society. My father knew that, and was using it to negotiate his way out of the unjust charges brought against him. But at the very last hour, those he'd bargained with betrayed him, slaying him mercilessly on foreign soil. Well, can you deny it, Lord Strongheart? 10 years have passed, and still now the 6 million inhabitants of our great capital rest easy believing that justice was done. That though his anonymity remains, the diabolical murderer was caught and executed. Very well then, you may have the truth. Tell me then, tell me what Clint really was. Next time!